Morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. It's been dubbed Operation Save Big Dog. The campaign to restore the PM's credibility, but some of his own MPs think it's barking mad. Some senior Conservatives say plans of a Downing Street clear out and some new policies don't go far enough. We'll speak to the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi, very shortly indeed. It is Monday, the 17th of January. Synagogue siege. 2 teenagers are arrested in Manchester after a British man held people hostage in a 10-hour standoff in Texas. Down, but not out. Boris Johnson looks to mount a fight back this week in the face of growing anger over Downing Street parties. Less time home alone. People in England can now end their COVID isolation after 5 days and 2 negative tests. Scene of devastation. The Red Cross warns of significant damage from a volcanic eruption on Tonga as New Zealand and Australia send reconnaissance planes to the region. No advantage Djokovic. The world tennis #1 arrives in Dubai as the Aussie Open begins without the defending champion.
Going virtual. The Chinese president is among the leaders addressing the World Economic Forum as the event is forced to go online only for the 2nd year running.
And I'm at Waterloo Station, where busy commuters are being cheered up by volunteers on what's meant to be the most difficult day of the year for mental health.
There's a social contract that we all have, that if you steal or if I steal, then the person who is the authority comes in and they fix the situation. But the person who fixes the situation is killing us.
Also ahead for you, how we can win. We speak to the activist and author campaigning to turn the tide on racial inequality in the United States. And we're on the trail of the dog detectives sniffing out sickness. We'll speak to the charity training up puppies to detect disease. That's to come. Let's start, though, with no let-up in the pressure on the PM as the furore over Downing Street parties, which breach lockdown rules, continues, as you can see, joined by the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us this morning. Let's just talk about what happened over in Texas to start with, if I may. We believe that it was a British terrorist, Malik Faisal Akram, who was responsible for that incident. 2 young men arrested in Greater Manchester overnight. What more can you tell us?
Well, I think the important thing, obviously, this is an ongoing situation. President Biden spoke about it being a terrorist incident. I also think it's an anti-Semitic incident. It's important that the police now carry out their inquiries, including, obviously, anti-terrorism squads. And I'm sure the Home Secretary will say more about this in due course. The good news is none of the hostages were harmed. They were all released safely. But clearly, this has, several ways to go here in the UK, and it's important that the police do their work and anti-terrorism squads do that work thoroughly to make sure we understand exactly what happened and what are the networks around this particular individual who would have supported him in his terrorism act.
Do we know if he was on the radar for the security services here in the UK?
Well, I can't obviously comment on an ongoing investigation. Kay, you'd understand that.
What is the, let's move on to the Prime Minister. What does he need to do to win back trust? Because it's at an all-time low.
Well, I think this is both, for me, personal. You will remember I lost my uncle to COVID. We couldn't visit him in hospital. We couldn't have a proper burial for him because of the restrictions. And, of course, it's very public because I'm Secretary of State for Education. I'm part of the team that delivered the vaccines, of course. And I think the Prime Minister understands the level of hurt in the country, for people sacrificed, people missed loved ones who they can't turn the clock back on. He said at dispatch box that I wish I could turn the clock back and go back to that 20th of May in the garden. He spent 25 minutes to what he perceived to be supporting his staff and encouraging them. And he wishes he hadn't done that. He wishes that he'd said, look, get back to your desk because this is wrong. I hope, by the way, I say this sincerely, I hope that I watched Keir Starmer's interview yesterday with Sophie Rayworth, that he also apologised, because I think it's only right
I will deal with that with Labour.
Of course, but I'm just saying that we all have a duty to do the right thing. I think what the Prime Minister has said, we've had the apology, now we need the details. And Sue Gray will take her evidence and conduct her inquiry and report swiftly. And the PM has said he will submit himself back to Parliament to a statement and be questioned on that. And I think that's the right thing to do. I think that is the fair thing to do. So I hope people will allow him the ability to respond to a thorough inquiry by a very senior civil servant.
Reports over the weekend, 2 people have come forward to say that they personally warned the Prime Minister that the email invitation said that it was a party and it shouldn't go ahead. He says that's not true. Why do you believe him?
Because I think he is absolutely right when he says it's not true, because I think ultimately the Sue Gray investigation will be able to look at all that, and he's obviously submitted himself to that investigation. And Sue Gray, as I know the civil service and how they will conduct their inquiry, will be thorough in terms of looking at emails, looking at correspondence, looking at everything. And I think it's important that she does that, but it's not true that the Prime Minister knew about this. He implicitly thought this was a work event. He went from, I think, 6 p.m. to 6:25 and then back to his desk. And I think it's only right that we wait for that.
We know the facts, though, don't we, Mrs Zahawi? We know that there were trestle tables with peanuts and goodness knows what else. We know that there was booze. We know that at the time only 2 people could meet socially distanced outside. People were literally putting their hand on the glass at care homes because they couldn't go in to see their loved ones. And the Prime Minister wants us to believe that he spent 25 minutes having a drink and thinking it wasn't a party.
All I can say to you is I completely understand how people feel angry about this. I think the Prime Minister himself
Let me just show you some pictures from this. This was one of the constituencies over the weekend. People have got lies written all over. Not that one, the other one. We'll come back to that one in just a second. This one, they've got lies written all over their constituency offices. And
as I said to you, that is not the anger, and the level of hurt is not lost on me or my family or anyone else. So I absolutely share that. All I would say is, we have to allow the investigation to take place. Why? Because that's the fair thing to do. You don't condemn a man without a thorough investigation. I think Sue Gray will conduct that and will report that.
She's the most famous woman in Britain at the moment, isn't she? Everybody's saying her name. What about this? This was obviously a cartoon in the Evening Standard reflecting on Her Majesty sitting on her own the day after the doors were coming off Number 10, people breaking swings, taking a suitcase to get booze, having a DJ in the basement. Come on.
And that is one of the most, the photographic image was one of the most painful images, I think, that will endure with all of us, with the nation. For anyone who's lost loved ones, as
the nation's mocking
families have done up and down the country. I can absolutely say to you that the Prime Minister feels the pain, which is why he came to Parliament, delivered an apology, said
he went into the tea rooms afterwards and say, I shouldn't really have apologised, but sometimes you just got to do it.
Well, that's hearsay and reporting. That's not true. That's not the Prime Minister that I've spoken to.
Someone who I trust implicitly told me that he'd had that conversation with the Prime Minister.
Well, look, if that someone who's prepared to come on your show and talk about it, all I can say to you is I've spoken to the Prime Minister and I know how much he recognises the pain and that people went through, and which is why he apologised and he came forward and said, look, I'm sorry. Just allow this investigation to take place. That's all he's asking. And then he will submit himself to Parliament with a statement to be questioned. And
if he misled Parliament, should he have stepped down?
Well, first of all, let's wait for the investigation. I think it's only right. Remember, our British values are all about fairness, and you don't condemn an individual before having all the facts before you. The thing that you and I both know is that he's apologised, and I hope other politicians do the same thing when they've actually done something wrong.
Come on, I'll speak to them about it. One of the other suggestions that was made by some of the backbenchers over the weekend was, if the Prime Minister is so confident that he's got the support of his party, why doesn't he put himself up for a vote of confidence and see how it goes?
Well, first of all, Prime Ministers don't. That's not how we operate.
It's happened before.
Well, you say that, but But the Prime Minister, I think, has every right to focus on the job. We've got a big levelling up agenda. We've got a levelling up white paper, which my department has been contributing to make sure that things like literacy, numeracy, levelling up is all about human capital, and education is their levelling up department. So we're doing tremendous work in that area, and you're going to hear more from me on this. You're going to hear more on the work we're doing on the cost of living. £4.2 billion to help people with the cost of living. I know it's something that I think Sky and other channels have been running today. The help we're doing in April, you get £9.50 for the national living wage. We're moving the taper for people on universal credit to help them with the cost of living. All these things are what the Prime Minister's focused on at the moment. That is the right thing to do. And I think it's right that he apologised. And it's right that he says, look, I will submit myself to Parliament once Sue Gray is reported with all the facts. And I think you'll find that that is the way we conduct ourselves in this country. Let's see what she has to say.
The week after next, I think, is when we're going to hear from her.
Well,
is that right?
she can obviously
She works for the
doing
Prime
it
Minister,
swiftly.
of course, which is tricky.
But the civil service, as you know, and this is a civil servant with the highest level of experience and integrity, and I think it's only right that she can take the evidence wherever it leads, and she has every right to do that, and of course deliver the
You talk about
outcome
levelling
swiftly.
up. The Resolution Foundation think tank, 9% of people find it difficult to heat their homes, and thus their kids at the moment. That is going to increase to 27% in April.
So the energy price cap remains in place. That's important. I just spoke about the national living wage going up.
Significantly higher.
I don't disagree with you. It's going to be huge pressure, which is why we're putting £4.2 billion of help. We're giving £500 million to local councils who know those families, who know the exact families who will have problem paying their utility bills. The national living wage going up, the taper. Between national living wage and the taper change on universal credit, that's £2,000 additional help for those most vulnerable. Plus, of course, things like the Warm Homes Grant and the winter fuel allowance.
And yet, more than a quarter of homes will still be struggling to keep people warm.
It is absolutely...
Under a Conservative government.
Which is why we're putting £4.2 billion to support those most vulnerable families. But we'll always look at other things all the time, and I know my colleagues, both in the Treasury and, of course, in the Department for Energy, are looking at how we can further mitigate. The best way to mitigate, Kate, is to make sure we have energy security, which is the investment in renewables, but not just offshore wind, which we're quadrupling, but in nuclear. Nuclear will give you that base load that helps you sort of wean yourself off hydrocarbons.
So does that mean that 27% of people will not be in fuel poverty?
Well, we continue to monitor the situation closely. The reason
shocking, isn't it, really?
Which is why the energy price cap is so important, which is why national living wage going up to £9.50 is so important, which is why the £500 million going to local government is so important. The taper on UC
all of that
is so
taken
important.
into account, still 27% of homes will be struggling.
And which is why we will always go further to make sure we do more for those who are really finding it challenging on energy.
Also, part of Operation Big Dog, apparently the idea is to turn the military on desperate refugees in the Channel. Is that a good idea?
Well, it is a good idea that there is a single command and control, and that includes not just naval vessels, but all other vessels, including border force, so that you actually have a coordinated operation in terms of these small boats. A really important idea is the legislation that Priti Patel's put through Parliament to allow us to have much better way of dealing with illegal migration, because there are legal routes for migration. That's right. I'm the son of immigrants to this country.
We know, of course, absolutely.
So there are legal.
Why it's really important.
It is really important. So there are legal routes to migration, but I think the illegal routes need to be dealt with, which is why the Nationality and Borders Bill is so important. By combining the command and control, it will allow Border Force to prepare for that bill to be implemented on the ground, so that we can finally deal with this issue, which is clearly challenging. There is no doubt.
Let me give you the optics of a naval vessel against a sinking dinghy with desperate refugees from Afghanistan who were left behind after we had to pull out.
Well, I'm very proud of what we did in Afghanistan.
We're not proud of the ones we left behind. They're still trying to get here.
We rescued tens of thousands of people from Afghanistan, and actually what we've done in finding those families, the young
But you
people,
appreciate
education
that is pretty bad optics.
I don't disagree with that. I think the Navy would always behave responsibly. The important thing is to make sure that actually the operation is well coordinated and well commanded.
Shouldn't be turning naval vessels on refugees, surely.
But you say that as you're sort of conjuring up imagery as if these great big naval vessels.
That's the picture that's going to be on the front of the Guardian.
It is
trust
about
me.
coordination to go after the illegal smugglers who are putting these people's lives at risk. The important thing is to.
But they're not the ones that are on the boat.
Well, but they're the ones we want to capture and prosecute and work with our French counterparts to make sure that also happens, including, by the way, so there are several strategies to make sure we deal with this and send the message very clearly that this is not a good route. This is putting your life in danger getting on these dinghies, and it's horrific to see what happened to those families. A lot of them actually happen to be Kurdish origin, dying on those dinghies. The fault lies with the smugglers, with those criminals.
So why
and we've got to go after them. So the way you do it, the way you do it is a multi-pronged strategy. So you've got your coordination on the channel. You've got the Nationality and Borders Bill and implementing that properly, and then you've got legal routes for migration, which is why we send the right message that there are legal routes. If you have a legitimate claim to refugee status, then there is a legal way of doing it. That's the best way of doing it, because we're going to cut out those illegal routes, and that's the coordination that we want to bring on board.
We're out of time, but just before I let you go, with your brief, are you still confident that the exams will go ahead
Yes.
this year? Absolutely no doubt whatsoever, despite so many teachers being off poorly at the moment.
Very well. The good news is teachers have done phenomenally well, and I thank them from the bottom of my heart, including those support staff. We couldn't have done the testing in week 1 on secondary schools without the support staff. Actually, exams in vocational have gone ahead in this month, and colleges have done brilliantly. I want to thank colleges and college principals for what they've done. Exams in the summer are going ahead, and we're full steam ahead making plans
100%.
for those. Well, we don't know what this virus will do. All I can say to you is we are witnessing the transition of the virus from pandemic to endemic. And back to the Prime Minister, on the big calls, he called it right, Omicron pre-Christmas. He said, we'll stick to plan B. And actually,
he had good advice.
He had very good advice. But in Labour Wales and the SNP in Scotland actually really closed down the economy. We remained the most open economy in Europe. So on the big calls, he got it right. We will have exams in the summer, but we will also very much recognise that those sitting those exams have had their education disrupted, which is why we're putting additional guidelines and help for them.
I have to let you go. I could talk all day to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Education Secretary. Thank you. Quick look at what is happening as far as the front pages are concerned. This morning, how is that story playing out? Operation Dead Meat reads the front of the Eye, as senior Tories warned that Boris Johnson's plan to save himself does not go far enough. The Mirror leads with a similar story. Their headline, Johnson's scapegoats. Partygate continues on the front of the Daily Telegraph this morning, as they say Boris Johnson faces a critical week over alleged COVID restrictions breaches at number 10. While the Express looks at the Prime Minister's fight-back plan to level up Britain. The Guardian says the PM is accused of attacking BBC to save his own skin. Just hearing there from the Minister about what's been happening in Texas, and counter-terrorism police have arrested 2 teenagers in Manchester as part of the investigation into that siege at a synagogue. The hostage taker has been named by the FBI as Malik Faisal Akram. He was a British citizen. He was shot dead after taking 4 people hostage. The 44-year-old from Blackburn travelled to the United States on the 2nd of January. Some COVID rules in the UK are changing as of today. Now, people who test positive for COVID in England will only need to isolate for 5 full days, as long as they test negative on days 5 and the morning of day 6. But some experts are sceptical, suggesting this is a risky move that is not based on current scientific evidence. There are also changes in Scotland today. This is what it's looking like. If a person's last vaccine dose was more than 4 months ago, they will need to prove they're boosted to be considered as fully vaccinated. Also, large outdoor events can now resume without distancing or capacity limits, a change that will see the return of Scottish football this evening. And looking at the latest COVID data for you this morning. In the last 24 hours, 70,924 new cases have been recorded. That excludes the latest number from Scotland. Another 88 deaths were recorded, taking the number of deaths within 28 days of a positive test to 151,987. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. Prince Andrew has been accused of victim blaming after his lawyers asked for Virginia Giuffre's mental health records. We're talking to the author, Robert Hardman. Speaking to a campaigner on the pressure facing menopausal women in the workplace. Also coming up, tackling Omicron. We'll be joined by the World Health Organization's Special Envoy for the COVID-19 response, Dr. David Nabarro, of course. But before all of that, the Red Cross is warning that the scale of devastation on the island nation of Tonga after a volcanic eruption could be immense, in their words. Satellite images show Saturday's huge eruption. It caused a tsunami with warnings issued as far away as Japan and Hawaii. Relief efforts are now underway, with both Australia and New Zealand sending surveillance flights to assess the damage. Let's speak to our Southeast Asia correspondent, Siobhan Robbins, who's standing by for us this morning. Hi, Siobhan. What more do we know?
Morning, Kay. A very precarious time for the people on Tonga. As you said, this huge volcano triggered a tsunami over the weekend, and it's still very unclear how many people have been affected by that. The main reason for that is the fact that communications are largely down. As you say, Australia and New Zealand sending these surveillance flights to try and find out how widespread that damage is. But Australia's Pacific Minister has said that there are widespread problems and damage to houses and buildings on the nation. When the wave went through, we saw videos coming out on Saturday of it rushing through streets. Also reports that a British woman has been swept into the sea. She was walking her dogs on Saturday when those tsunami waves hit. Her brother gave us this update.
The tsunami swept them away, both Angela and James. James was able to hold on to a tree for quite some period of time. I don't know whether Angela was swept away immediately. Or we just adored her. Yes, lovely girl. Look, it's 48 hours. I'm not holding out much hope. I think it'll be a body recovery rather than a body retrieval rather than finding her. But I'm, hoping.
As you can hear, a really difficult time for that family as they wait for news. As I said, no confirmed deaths at the moment, but aid agencies are warning up to 80,000 people could have been affected by this tsunami. Big concerns around shelter, water as well, the fact that ash may have polluted the local water sources. And we're hoping to get more information when those surveillance flights by New Zealand and Australia return.
OK, for now, thanks very much, Siobhan. Thank you. French police are investigating the death of a 5-year-old British girl who was killed while skiing in the Alps. Terrible story. The girl was taking part in a ski lesson with 4 other children when an adult collided with her as he was coming down the mountain. A man in his 40s has been arrested and is being held on suspicion of manslaughter. The investigation will focus on whether he was skiing too fast or not paying due attention to safety. The Australian Open has begun in Melbourne, but without defending men's champion Novak Djokovic. The world number 1 has flown to Dubai after losing his bid to stay in Australia. Judges there upheld the cancellation of his visa because of COVID rules. Japan has condemned North Korea after firing of 2 suspected ballistic missiles, saying it threatened the peace and security of the region. In less than 2 weeks, nuclear-armed North Korea has conducted 3 other missile tests. For the second year, the World Economic Forum will be online today. The Chinese president due to give a special address later on this morning. Let's find out more, shall we? Tom standing by for us in Beijing. Hi, Tom. So online again.
Yeah, morning, Kay. They had hoped it wouldn't be online, that things would be back to normal, but this is going to be an online-only event. As you say, the town of Davos itself will remain pretty empty. That does suit China's President Xi Jinping. He hasn't left the country in a long time. State media here call it cloud diplomacy. What he does do is video calls, and this is a good opportunity for him to put China's case to the world. Remember, he wasn't allowed to speak at COP26 because no one was allowed to address it via video link. And ahead of the Beijing Olympics, this is a chance to get back on the international stage. I think the main topic of President Xi's speech, but also for the whole week of discussions, is going to be about the post-COVID recovery and how the world gets back together. We do have some data on that. China released its GDP figures today. They show it had 8% growth, the highest growth in a very long time compared to the year before, which is a very, very high number. But there are some slight reasons for concern. That growth slowed very sharply in the second half of the year as they dealt with regulatory challenges, also dealing with COVID still here. And the demographics released show that they've had their lowest birth rate for a long time. So that will be worrying, not just for China, but for the rest of the world, because they have driven so much of global growth. So if China's going to have problems, that could pose problems for the rest of the countries around the world coming out of COVID.
OK, thanks, Tom, thanks. Is this the saddest day of the year? Well, according to some, it is. Known as Blue Monday, the mix of long nights, bad weather, post-Christmas, apparently leaves us feeling a bit low, frankly. Well, today, the NHS and the Samaritans are both launching campaigns to help people in the UK address mental health issues. Ali is down at London's Waterloo station for us this morning, where Samaritans are going to be out and about, aren't they? What's the plan, Ali? Good morning.
Morning, Kay. Well, the plan is to basically get people to talk about mental health, because it's not really in a busy commuter station that you'd expect to be stopped, offered a cup of tea with a smile and a chat, but that's what they're doing to busy commuters this morning. As you say, Blue Monday is meant to be supposedly the most difficult day of the year, right after Christmas, but they want to sort of reframe that and say that every day of the year we should be talking about mental health, not just on Blue Monday. I want to have a quick chat to Olivia, who's one of the volunteers. Morning, Olivia.
Morning.
How has the response been so far this morning? Have people been coming and speaking to you guys?
Yes, they have. It's still quite early, so we're waiting for the commuter footfall to pick up a bit, but we've had some people coming over asking what this is all about, giving them a tea bag and telling them to connect over a cuppa together.
And I want to speak to you about, we've got an artist coming, Nathan Wyburn, who was on Britain's Got Talent, and he makes these amazing art pieces. Tell me a bit about this.
So Nathan has done a special commissioned piece of work using coffee and biscuits for our Brew Monday campaign. And as you can see, the image is about two people connecting, having a catch-up over a cuppa, and building that chance to talk and chat.
Thank you so much. So he's going to be here later, making a piece of art out of coffee and speaking to people and offering them a cup of tea. It's all about talking about mental health openly, and anyone who's in Waterloo Station today or stations up and down the country may well be met with a smile and a cup of coffee by one of the lovely Samaritans that are here.
OK, well, I think you look even more beautiful this morning than you normally do, and hopefully that'll cheer you up.
OK. As do you.
Thank you, love. See you in an hour. Thank you. So, as we were saying, the NHS is launching a new campaign to encourage the nation to take better care of their mental health. And they're doing so with the help of a very famous Beatles song. Let's take a listen.
Help. I need somebody. Help.
Not just anybody.
Help.
Yeah, we recognise it, don't you? As you can see, the campaign features some very famous faces, including Craig David and Ella Henderson. The NHS hopes to encourage anybody experiencing anxiety or depression to come forward and see how talking therapies can help.
We want to reach everyone and ask them if they're struggling. And by that, I mean things like feeling really depressed, low mood, sleepless, loss of appetite, unable to concentrate, unable to enjoy the things you used to do, a whole range of common mental health problems like that. Our evidence-based therapies can work with you to change that. So there is hope.
Blue Monday, I'm afraid, today. Stay with us. We're going to cheer you up throughout the programme. We've got puppies later on. First, the weather.
Look forward to brighter skies. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southern parts will be mostly settled over the next few days with overnight fog and frost, but there'll be some rain in the north and the west.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Southeastern parts of the US have been left without power after a storm brought strong winds and heavy snow. Let's take a look at some of the images that better illustrate that for you. This car struggles through the dangerous conditions that led to 5 governors declaring a state of emergency. Up to 10 inches of snow fell in some areas of North Carolina and flights were cancelled across several states. 10 inches, that's about that, isn't it? My goodness. Let's take a look at some of the other pictures in the morning's newspapers. I know you like this section of the programme, don't you? This is the Telegraph. Wow, look at that picture. Shot of Whitby Abbey in North Yorkshire. 299 images stacked on top of each other to create this amazing star trail. It was full moon, wasn't it, last night as well? The Guardian has a picture of Rudy, the spotted Bengal cat, in the Short-Haired Cat Society Show Championship. There he is, held up by his owner, wearing a feline face mask, just showing off. Gorgeous pussycat. The Times shows us students in China practising a plum blossom fist. It's a routine which is a form of kung fu, apparently. Don't try that at home, folks. And the Bags Lady. The Mirror shows us a picture of Angela Clark, who's entered the record books by collecting 10,000 plastic bags dating as far back as 1954. The question that immediately springs to mind is, why? And people in southwest Mexico gather in traditional costume for the town's grand festival, which took place over the weekend. Not sure that would suit me. Quick look at the top stories for you so far this morning on the programme. 2 teenagers have been arrested in Manchester as part of an investigation into the British man shot dead after a siege at a synagogue in Texas. The time people in England need to spend in isolation for contracting COVID is being reduced to 5 days from today. And more pressure on the PM over the Downing Street parties row, with many of his own MPs suggesting an overhaul of Downing Street culture and new policies aren't enough to restore his credibility. Well, within the last half an hour or so, we've been putting some of that to the Education Secretary, Nadhim Zahawi. He told me the Prime Minister understands the hurt caused over the parties during lockdown.
I think the Prime Minister understands the level of hurt in the country. For people sacrificed, people missed loved ones who they can't turn the clock back on. He said at dispatch box that I wish I could turn the clock back and go back to that 20th of May in the garden. He spent 25 minutes to what he perceived to be supporting his staff and encouraging them. And he wishes he hadn't done that. He wishes that he'd said, look, get back to your desk because this is wrong. I hope, by the way, I say this sincerely, I hope that I watched Keir Starmer's interview yesterday with Sophie Rayworth, that he also apologised, because I think it's only right that...
I will deal with that with Labour.
Of course, but I'm just saying that we all have a duty to do the right thing. I think what the Prime Minister has said, we've had the apology, now we need the details.
Tamara's here. Glad to see she got the Navy memo as well this morning. What do we make of what the Education Secretary had to say? It's not going away, this, despite what they're trying to do.
It's not going away. We're not expecting the Sue Gray report until probably next week now. And I think there's a sense that the mood is hardening among Tory MPs. We now have 6 of them on record, another one at the weekend calling for the Prime Minister to resign. Several I've spoken to say that the mood on the doorsteps is pretty grim, that they're receiving postbags of 400 or 500 emails. That's a lot, being critical of the Prime Minister over this. But there were no huge revelations at the weekend, and Nadhim Zahawi, I thought was interesting, he repeated a denial from Number 10 yesterday that the Prime Minister had known about the email about this critical party on the 20th of May.
And he said he believed him when he said
he said that, despite some reports at the weekend that the Prime Minister was warned it looked like a party. They're saying that he didn't know about it, he didn't see any emails about it. So if that's borne out in Sue Gray's inquiry, I think Downing Street will feel pretty pleased about that. In the meantime, they know this is a make or break week. There's a few new policies have been rushed forward, including plans to send the military to help tackle tackle illegal migration in the Channel, plans to freeze the BBC licence fee. All of that has come out today and got some decent coverage in the Conservative supporting newspapers. They'll be hoping to try and seize back the agenda. But of course, it all hinges still for many Conservatives on what is in that report and how damaging it is.
Fuel poverty is going to be a big problem, though.
It is. The cost of living is going to be a big problem. We have a couple of big reports out today showing just how many people are going to be really struggling to heat their homes, struggling to afford to buy food. They know that energy bills, which will be the new price cap, will be announced at the beginning of February, and that's how much we'll pay from April, combined with a tax rise. In government, they are pretty clear. Energy bills are going to go up by hundreds of pounds in April, whatever support the government offers. And so if Boris Johnson wants to try and seize back the agenda, there are plenty of obstacles in his way, including, of course, that a lot of people are going to feel a lot worse off.
OK, tomorrow for now. Tomorrow's Take at 9 o'clock.
See you then.
Look forward to it. Thank you. Meantime, Prince Andrew has been accused of victim blaming after his lawyers asked for Virginia Giuffre's mental health records. The Duke of York's lawyers want to inspect notes from her counselling sessions after it was suggested she may suffer from false memories. Daily Mail columnist and author of Queen of the World, Robert Hardman, is with us now. Hi, Robert. How is this going to look?
Well, good morning, Kate. This is the latest stage in what's going to be a long and tortuous legal process. We've seen both sides really, deploy every tool in the box. It's what happens in this sort of particularly civil litigation in the US, and I dare say we will see more of it. I mean, some will, accuse the Duke's lawyers of using particular tactics, but it seems that in an American civil case, anything goes as far as one can see.
What do you think the rest of the royal family are making of all of this? I
think they find the whole thing utterly, distressing, regrettable. Wish it wasn't there. I think they made that pretty clear last week with the decision to remove all the military titles and patronages from the Duke, and those two words in the palace statement we saw last week. He will fight this case, quotes, as a private citizen. When you're born HRH, when it's your birthright. And you have those three letters taken away. I mean, that's really, even the Edward VIII, after he abdicated, didn't lose or wasn't told to stop using his HRH. So, the family will want this out of the way as quickly as possible. But the legal process has to take its course.
He'll still be allowed to call himself Prince, though, will he?
Still Prince, still Duke of York. I mean, that's, like Mr. I mean, you're born with that. And the HRH, he hasn't been, some people have said he's been stripped of it. He hasn't been stripped of it. He's agreed not to use it. So he's effectively in the same boat as the Duke of Sussex and the Duchess of Sussex. Again, they've agreed not to use the title because it sort of, it implies, it shows a sort of a royal status from which he has now stepped back.
What's happening with Harry saying that he wants to pay police officers? It's not how we do things over here, is it?
No, as a former Royal Protection Officer, Ken Wolfe has written in the Mail today, you can't just sort of hire, Scotland Yard when you feel the need. I mean, understandably, the Prince is extremely worried about the security of his family. Who can blame him for that? He wants to do absolutely the right thing by them. But it seems that this toing and froing with the Home Office has now been going on for a while. I mean, it's not just in the last few days. And it also takes us back to one of the central charges from the Oprah Winfrey interview, which the Duke and Duchess famously did, in which you may well remember, there was a sort of question of the family somehow refusing security for them. And that was tied into the whole issue of race. But I mean, what this actually underlines is the fact this is really a matter for the British government. It's nothing to do with the Queen or the royal family. This is Harry versus Priti Patel, not HM.
How's Her Majesty think coping with all of this stress? 95 years old.
Well, I mean, clearly these things are stressful, but I've said it before. She has seen it all before. I mean, she has lived through the most extraordinary upheavals, going right the way back to childhood, abdication and war. She's had all sorts of family dramas. I mean, let us not forget, we're on the eve of the Platinum Jubilee, 70 years on the throne. That's never happened before. But at the start of her Golden Jubilee, right at the start, she was laid low by appalling tragedy. Her sister, Princess Margaret, died in February, and just weeks later, her mother died. And all through that year, there was another trial, all right, nothing on the scale of this one, but there was a trial hanging over the monarchy in the form of the trial of the former royal butler, Paul Burrell. All those events were happening. And yet the Queen didn't miss a single Golden Jubilee engagement. It was an extraordinary year. I remember it very well. It was a triumph. The Queen was very moved by it. So I think there is a sense that there are family matters, noise is off, they're one thing, but my main duty is to the nation as head of state, and that carries on. And I think the Queen has, over the years, she's very good at compartmentalising all these issues. So yes, it's stressful, but it's not going to make any difference to the way she approaches her duty, as you say, at the age of 95.
Great to talk to you, Robert. Thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you.
Thanks.
New research suggesting women are not getting enough support in the workplace when they enter the menopause, even though symptoms can be quite severe. Joining us now is menopause campaigner from the group Menopause Support, Diane Danzenbrink. Hello to you, Diane. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Looking at the figures, almost 20% of women in the UK experiencing menopausal symptoms say they feel under pressure to leave their job.
Yeah, exactly. So this new research today from childcare provider Coro Kids is really interesting because it shows again how so many women experiencing perimenopause or menopause are struggling in the workplace. And there are various reasons for that, including lack of support.
Why won't women suffering from the menopause or menopausal symptoms apply for top jobs, according to the Fawcett Society?
Yeah, so I think it very much depends on the individual. So menopause is a very individual situation, as with, as with anything, whether it's mental health, etc. So for 1 in 4 women, they'll experience almost no symptoms at all. 2 in 4 will experience symptoms, but 1 in 4 will experience what they call debilitating symptoms. And I think for those who are experiencing debilitating symptoms of menopause, very often, because if they're experiencing a lack of support and particularly a lack of understanding, and I think this is what it all comes down to, it comes down to this lack of understanding of the complexity of menopause and how wide-ranging symptoms can be. Very often they are either taking a sideways step in their career, and sadly some are stepping away altogether.
Yeah, I'm very lucky to have Christian and Khalid in the studio with me here. I have it so cold as a polar bear in the corner trying to break the ice, because that's the only way that I can deal with some menopausal symptoms. And that is, just in the middle, really, because there are, as you said, a lot of women who struggle even more. One wonders why it is not a characteristic that is part of the Equality Act.
Yeah, and so, I have to say, since I started campaigning on this issue, and thankfully there are many people who are raising it now. We've seen surveys by the government on this. We're waiting for reports, etc. We've got a government APPG. Last year, Maria Caulfield said that we would have a task force for menopause this year. So things are moving in the right direction, but it's not happening quickly enough. What we don't need is rounds and rounds of meetings. What we need is for there to be some action. And this is really quite simple. This all comes down to education. None of us ever learned anything about menopause. So consequently, whether we're, whoever we are, whether we're going to experience it directly or indirectly, what we need is a greater understanding. And there are now some really good resources out there, free resources that any organisation can tap into. So the CIPD have produced some excellent resources for HR, for line managers, for business owners. So that's something that every business could take a look at today. What many women said was that there was no forum in the workplace for them to talk about menopause openly. So again, something that every organisation could do today is that they could implement some kind of menopause collective where people could come together to talk about it, because just talking about it and knowing that you're not the only person going through it can make a huge difference. And particularly for
fair, we
large
do have
organisations.
we do have a forum at Sky where women can get together and talk about the menopause, and that makes a big difference for women of a certain age. Actually, you can go through the menopause younger as well, of course. But it's important for younger people, men and women, to realise what the menopause is. I call it the power surge because menopause was really a dirty word for a long time. But I think the tide is turning, isn't it?
100%. Things are definitely changing. You know, we are seeing some organisations doing some excellent work in this space, but what we need that across the board, because essentially, if somebody steps away from the workplace before they have reached their true potential, that's tragic. That's tragic for the individual. Also, obviously, can have a financial impact on their family situation. But it's also tragic for the employer because they're losing a valuable member of their team. The answers really are quite simple, and it is absolutely a win-win situation.
Diane, we must leave it there, but it's great to talk to you. Thanks so much for taking the time. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Kay.
Thanks a lot. As of today, people in England who test positive for coronavirus will only be required to isolate for 5 full days as long as they test negative on the 5th and the 6th day, or certainly the morning of the 6th day. Joining us now is Dr. David Nabarro from the World Health Organization. Hi, Doctor. Thank you for joining us. Do you think this is a good idea?
I think that every government now has to be dealing with just one really major challenge, and that is an awful lot of people are sick with COVID right now, and that means a lot of absenteeism. And so each government has to make a trade-off. Which is the greater risk? To have further collapse of essential services like hospitals and supermarkets and the like because of people just being absent for long periods, or shorten the period of absence, accept the risk that some may still be infectious, but the majority won't be at the end of a shorter period of isolation, and try to keep society going. And I watch these choices being made. I completely understand them, and I think that as long as there is just one thing done, and that is that people are told that we're still dealing with a virus about which we know very little, and that it may be necessary, if we don't get things right the first time, perhaps to adjust the instructions and change the restrictions. But right now, the plan is to try to shorten isolation and to see if that can reduce the absenteeism problem.
And to the other end of the scale, Doctor, what about long COVID? What do we know about that? How do we know whether it's long COVID or whether it's lethargy and brain fog and as a result of other ailments, or indeed the season?
It's always been a challenge to work out for certain whether the longer symptoms that sometimes occur during and after a viral illness are what some would call a genuine illness, and what others would say is perhaps something that's due to one's attitude and mood. I've always been a believer that there is such a thing as a prolonged illness after viruses, and we're seeing exactly that with COVID. Long COVID is for real. Some say it's 1 in 20 getting it, others say it's perhaps 1 in 30 or 1 in 40. But whatever it is, many people do have prolonged symptoms that can last up to 3 months, even longer. And does Omicron give us the same long COVID as other forms of the virus do? My colleagues who work on long COVID say that preliminary signs suggest that it is happening. So it just leaves me to say to everybody, this virus is horrible. It has so many effects in so many different ways. Long COVID is definitely one of them.
OK, but for most of us, most people who have had COVID, it does appear from the latest figures that the end is in sight. We're down from 120,000 cases on Sunday to 81,000 cases yesterday, that in a week, down by a third in the UK.
Well, I mean, first things first, you know, this is the UK story, but really elsewhere in the world, things are nothing like as promising. We have many reports of countries where health services are overwhelmed because of illness, combination of Delta and Omicron. So looking at it globally, there's still a long way to go. But looking at it from a UK point of view, yeah, there does appear to be light at the end of the tunnel. All I'm saying to everybody is, I think that it's going to be bumpy before we get to the end. So even though it's possible to start imagining that the end of the pandemic is not far away, just everybody be ready for the possibility that there will be more variations and mutations coming along, or that there will be further challenges with other surges, even of Omicron coming. Don't imagine that it's all going to be fine. I know that sounds like I'm a killjoy. I'm trying not to be. I'm just simply sharing my own emotions about this.
I read over the weekend that more and more young children are in hospital in London with COVID. How do we protect our little ones? Of course, something close to your heart.
I saw that. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about my grandchildren. I just found out over the weekend that, in fact, one of my grandchildren, a young lad called Max, who's still, I mean, he's just over 1, and he's got COVID with his mum, and they've been isolating. It's super hard to protect children. I think this is just one of the many really troublesome features about this disease, is that children get it. They don't get very ill, but they're perfectly capable of passing it on. And we're going to go on having children actually acting as the vectors of the virus for some time to come. And that means, of course, that there will be some children who get severely ill. And I noticed, as you have, that there are increasing numbers of children in hospital with some consequences of their COVID. I've got nothing, unfortunately, that I can say about this as a specific point, but it just helps me make my general point, which is that we should, all of us, still be respectful of this virus. Do what you can to stop transmitting it. Do what you can to protect others from being affected by it. It's not the common cold. I know people would like it to be. It's a virus that has still some really unpleasant features. Let's do our best to protect people from it if we possibly can.
Well, we all wish Max better with his mum, and hopefully that happens very soon. Thank you very much indeed, Doctor. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.